Good evening. I'm calling to order the meeting of the City of Salem Budget Committee for May 2nd, 2018. Would the recorder please call the roll?
Mayor Bennett.
Here.
Member Kaiser.
Present.
Member Anderson.
Likewise.
Member Nanke.
Here.
Member McCoy.
Here.
Member Osick. Absent. Member Hoy.
Here.
Member Cook.
Here.
Member Lewis.
Here.
Member Nordyke.
Here.
Member Tigan.
Here.
Member Mingo.
Here.
Member Moore Green.
Here.
Member Bassett.
Here.
Member Judy. Absent. Member Hazlitt.
Here.
Member Bergman.
Here. Member
Milton. Absent.
Thank you. Will you please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We will now have public testimony. And we don't have anybody signed up. Is there anybody in the audience who would like to address the Budget Committee before we get started?
I think we have one member of the public here. Yeah, Jane, want to say something? No
Good evening, Mayor and City Council members. I'm quite surprised to be called up. I'm Jane Downing with the Center for Hope and Safety, and you have a new format for budget hearings, so I thought I'd just come down and listen in and learn. And I just want to say, for our nonprofit and all the nonprofits that you support in our community, I want to say thank you. It's amazing what we're able to do when we work together, and we just love having the support of the City Council, city staff. We couldn't do it without caring folks in our community. So thank you, and thank you for the opportunity, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
You need to give your organization.
You come and testify every meeting.
Thank you.
And Jane,
Yes.
if I might, on behalf of all the families that you serve, thank you for the work that you and your organization have done so diligently and faithfully for so many years.
Thank you. And we hope to come before you pretty soon with some really exciting news about some transitional housing and permanent housing in the downtown core area, and keeping some property on the tax rolls by partnering with businesses at the same time. So we're really excited about it, and I can't wait to tell you all about it. So
Excellent.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Anybody else? Oh, good. All right. Moving right along. May I have a motion to approve the minutes of the April 25th, 2018 meeting?
So moved.
Second.
So we have a motion by Member Cook and a second by Member Hazlitt. All those in favor of accepting the April 25th, 2018 Budget Committee meeting minutes as provided, please signify by saying yes.
Yes.
All those opposed? No. Okay. Thank you. The motion passes. Thank you. I'd now like to invite Budget Officer Jacobs to review the action items and hand out material, including the additions agenda this evening.
Thank you so much, Chair Moore Green, and good evening, everyone. We actually have quite a few items to review this evening that are action items and handout items. And what I would propose that we do relative to the errata items, they require the approval of the Budget Committee. So if we could just make a single motion, actually moving, if you agree with staff recommendation, moving staff recommendation for erratas 2, 3, 4, and 5. And I will just very briefly describe those erratas to you. Errata 2 is a Scrivener error errata. It has no budget impact. We always choose to, if we have a concern that an error may impede comprehension and understanding, we try to do an errata report to correct that error. There are 3 Scrivener errors in errata sheet 2, and they're identified in the report, and address errors on pages 103, and 232 of the City of Salem budget and page 31 of the Urban Renewal Agency budget. The corrected wording, pie chart, and capital project funding source information is displayed in the report. So the corrections are contained in the report. Errata Report 3 asks the Budget Committee to amend its recommendation of the Capital Improvement Plan and amend the proposed fiscal year 2019 budget. The errata calls for the addition of a stormwater project in the amount of $150,000 to do design work for the Mill Race Culvert replacement at Fire Station 1. The errata also includes $800,000 for a stormwater project that is currently in the proposed budget for $235,000. This errata thus increases the budget total to $1,035,000. This project, which is categorized as a carryover, appears on page 335 of the City of Salem budget, and because of the additional new funding for the project, it also needs to be added to the capital improvement plan, which you recommended at your last meeting. So we're asking you to amend that recommendation. Errata Sheet 4 corrects an omission in the Equipment Replacement Reserve Fund. It adds $139,670 in proceeds from the sale of assets. These proceeds will augment cost centers in the Equipment Replacement Reserve that are specifically identified by city department and fund designations. The offset to the additional revenue is a commensurate increase to unappropriated ending working capital. Errata Sheet 5, which appears on the additions agenda, addresses the best sort of problem, actually. We should always have this type of problem. We need to increase the appropriation authority in the Urban Renewal Agency budget for the Convention Center Gain-Loss Reserve to allow for the transfer of net program income from the Convention Center operations. With this errata, we can correct a practice where the program income is transferred to the reserve in the fiscal year subsequent to the year in which the program income was earned. The additional appropriation authority will allow us to transfer fiscal year 2018 program income at the beginning of fiscal year 2019, and then the program income that's actually earned in fiscal year 2019 will be transferred at the end of that fiscal year. Unfortunately, the recommended actions are incomplete that I've placed on this errata report. So what we have now is an errata of an errata, which is kind of a budget joke that's not funny. So what I need to ask you to do with your motion is to amend Action 2 of the report to include an increase in the unappropriated ending fund balance of the Convention Center Gain-Loss Reserve by $700,000 to offset the increase in transfer revenue. So that's just, so when you do your motion, it will be staff recommendations as amended. And I'm happy to take any questions about those errata items. This is the hardest thing, to admit that we've made mistakes. Well, not all of these are mistakes. Some of these are additional items. But we have the special distinction in the budget office to come to you publicly and admit our errors, and to do it on tape. So it's extra special. I'm saying that we have a special point in the agenda in which we get to do it.
Are you admitting your errors or your erratas?
Well, there you go. So if I could have a motion, please.
May I have a motion, please, to...
Errata sheets 2 through 5 with the amendment to errata 5.
all those in favor of accepting this motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Hearing none? Motion passes. Thank gentlemen. Motion passes. Thank you.
And thank you. So I'll move on to the information items. The first information item, item 5A, is the summary of Budget Committee actions. It includes the report requests and correspondence from the April 25th meeting. This summary report, when it appears on your next agenda, will include the items that you just approved. So those will be documented in this report as well. Information item 5E, I'm skipping around just a bit. What I'm doing is I'm skipping the correspondence. I'm going to the reports, and then we'll circle back to correspondence. So item 5E is very relevant to this evening's budget reviews. It's about the tax increment funding in the Urban Renewal Agency. So I would suggest that if the report has prompted any questions for you, that we allow staff to respond to those questions following that budget review, if that's possible. And then You will notice on the summary of Budget Committee actions, item 5A again, that we thought we would have the next series of information reports ready for the May 9th meeting agenda, but we hustled and we got those reports to you a bit earlier. So those reports are items 5J, a proposal for the Blight to Bright program, item 5K, safety in city parks and park ranger update, and item 5L, elimination of DVD rental charge and youth collection overdue fines. Because the reports are coming to you a bit early and because we have a full agenda this evening, I would respectfully request that questions and discussion regarding the reports be delayed until the end of the meeting or to the May 9th meeting when representatives from every city department will be in attendance. If the reports prompt additional questions for you, please let me know so we can be sure that we obtain answers in advance of that meeting on May 9th. And then the remaining items of information are correspondence, and I believe they all are pertaining to sidewalk replacement. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Okay. Very good. We're going to now move to the public hearings, and the committee's public hearing this evening is on the proposed uses of the state revenue sharing funds, and the public hearing is now open. Does the Budget Office have a presentation?
Yes, very brief. The public hearing this evening is the first of two the city is required to hold on the uses of state revenue sharing funds in fiscal year 2019. This hearing was noticed in the Statesman Journal on Monday, April 16th, 2018. While state revenue sharing funds are general purpose, which means local governments have discretion on how the funds are spent, the city must identify possible uses and seek assistance from the public in doing so. It has been the practice of the city of Salem to recommend these funds be used to offset the cost of police patrol services. For your reference, the division budget for police patrol services totals $25.5 million, and this budget appears on page 241 of the Safe Community Service Area. The assignment of state shared revenues to support police services appears on 172 and is part of the total of $5,298,760 for state revenue sharing funds. There are other sources of state revenue sharing funds that are assigned to the police. The amount of state revenue sharing estimated for fiscal year 2019 is $1,650,370, which represents 6.5% of the Patrol Division expenditure budget. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Is there anyone here present that would like to provide testimony regarding the proposed uses of the state revenue sharing fund? Okay.
I have a question. Does
Yes.
that also include the marijuana?
That's a great question. This particular amount does not include the marijuana state shared revenue, but we have actually assigned those revenues to the police department, along with a second alcohol-based state shared revenue and a portion of the 911 state shared revenue. So we have made those assignments to the police department in that display that I noted on page 241. I beg your pardon, 172. 172.
Kelly, can you describe what the sources of that revenue are, the state shared revenue?
Sure. Each quarter, cities receive 14% of the total receipts collected by the OLCC on the sale of alcoholic beverages. And so these revenues are allocated to cities based on population with an adjustment for local taxing effort.
Are there any other questions? Okay. The public hearing is now closed. Ooh, well, yeah. Okay. May I have a motion recommending the proposed uses of the state revenue sharing funds?
So moved.
Thank you, Member Anderson. May I have a second?
Second.
Member Hoy, thank you very much. All those in favor of accepting the motion to recommend the proposed uses of the state revenue sharing funds, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. Motion passes. Thank you very much. Now we will have Deputy City Manager Casey Duncan will present the overview of the Urban Renewal Agency and two service area budgets this evening. The Urban Renewal Agency and the Strong and Diverse Economy Service Area presentation will occur consecutively. And then following that, There will be an opportunity for the Budget Committee to ask questions of the staff and discuss both the budgets. So, Deputy City Manager Casey, it's all yours. Oh,
Thank
Duncan.
you.
Excuse
Allow me
me.
just one moment here to get to the proper slide. All right, thank you, Chair Moore Green and members of the Budget Committee. As mentioned, I'm Casey Duncan, Deputy City Manager, and it's my opportunity to first get to present to you Salem's Urban Renewal Agency budget for fiscal year 2019. Salem Urban Renewal Agency is its own distinct corporation. The Urban Renewal Agency Board is constituted of the Mayor and City Council, with the Mayor acting as the Chair. The City Manager serves as the Executive Director of the Urban Renewal Agency. Staff support to the urban renewal programs is provided through an intergovernmental agreement with the City of Salem. Salem's Urban Renewal Agency invests in approved public infrastructure, parks, trail connections, environmental cleanup, and natural restoration. Leveraging urban renewal resources with private investment has opened blighted areas to investment, increased employment, and enhanced economic opportunities where they may not have otherwise occurred. Our 7 urban renewal areas are featured on this slide. From the north to the south, they are North Gateway in light orange, formed in 1990 and is the largest at 926 acres. The area is currently very active with recent contributions to affordable housing and the Career Technical Education Center. Riverfront Downtown in light brown is the oldest area, formed in 1975. Among its many contributions are the Riverfront Park, parking garages, convention center, and Peter Courtney Minto Island pedestrian bridge. West Salem in yellow, founded in 2001 with a focus to date on improvements to Wallspring Park, trails, and 2nd Street, the business district, and wayfinding. South Waterfront in green is the newest area, formed in 2007 and includes a section of Minto Island. McGillcrest in pink is focused on raising funds to leverage McGillcrest Street transportation improvements. Fairview, the area in light green, formed in 1984. The area has attracted significant industrial development to the former state-owned farmland and is no longer collecting tax increment. Mill Creek in purple, formed in May 2005 with the purpose of creating about 650 acres of shovel-ready development on sites owned by the state of Oregon. Amazon, FedEx, Home Depot, Capstone, Henningston, and others have made large investments at the Mill Creek Corporate Center. Urban renewal activities are funded by tax increment financing. The incremental tax increases resulting from accelerated property values during the life of an urban renewal area. Taxing districts continue to collect revenue at a capped level set when the area is formed. This is demonstrated on the screen in blue and is referred to as the frozen base. The increment shown in red is used to eliminate blight, stimulate development, and improve property values and the quality of life in the area. When the area closes, the original formula for tax revenue distribution resumes, and with a successful urban renewal area, upon closure, taxing districts get additional tax revenues generated as a result of the urban renewal activity, and that's demonstrated in green in the latter years of the slide. To collect tax increment, the agency must have debt. Revenues are used to fund projects and pay off the debt. In Salem, funding priorities are framed by urban renewal area plans and the policies and goals established by the Urban Renewal Agency Board with input from other advisory bodies. The Urban Renewal Agency budget is comprised of 4 funds. The Tax Allocation Bond Fund or Debt Service Fund includes the tax increment revenues realized in each individual urban renewal area. Expenditures in this fund support the repayment of indebtedness required to fund project improvements within the area. The expenditure budgets for fiscal year 2019 is $17.8 million. Information about the debt service fund begins on page 13 of the Urban Renewal Agency budget publication. The Tax Allocation Bond Fund or Capital Improvements Fund receives the proceeds realized from short and long-term borrowings in the Debt Services Fund. Those proceeds are used to fund project improvements. The total expenditure budget proposed for fiscal year 2019 is $55.2 million, and details about projects in each urban renewal area begins on page 23. Operational revenues and expenditures of the agency-owned Salem Convention Center are accounted for in the Convention Center Fund. Revenues are derived from food sales and meeting room and equipment rentals. The proposed fiscal year 2019 expenditure budget, with the approval of the errata this evening, is approximately $7.8 million. As the convention center opened, the Urban Renewal Agency also established a gain-loss reserve to help augment an operating shortfall or to fund repairs of capital improvements at the facility. A combination of transient occupancy tax funds and income from the convention center operations have been used to fulfill the $4 million goal for this reserve. Working capital to begin fiscal year 19 is estimated at $4.7 million. The operating budget is $825,000, and information about both convention center funds begins on page 53. In fiscal year 2019, the Urban Renewal Agency will continue to fund loan and grant programs in the Riverfront Downtown, North Gateway, West Salem, urban renewal areas. Several infrastructure projects will also be funded. These include Union Street bike-friendly street improvements, streetscape improvements in both Riverfront Downtown and North Gateway, the purchase of right-of-way along McGilchrist Street for future transportation improvements, and design improvements to Wallace Road and 2nd Street Northwest. In addition, the Urban Renewal Agency is purchasing property on Fisher Road Northeast to partner with Salem Housing Authority on an affordable housing project. In addition to the various programs offered by the Urban Renewal Agency to promote a strong and diverse economy, the City of Salem proposes $14.3 million in fiscal year 2019 toward this outcome. Other funds that support a strong and diverse economy include community development, more commonly referred to as the Building and Safety Fund, cultural and tourism, frequently known as the TOT, or the Transient Occupancy Taxes Fund, general fund support of urban development, the airport, downtown parking, leasehold, and equipment replacement reserve funds for the replacement of parking meters. The amount proposed in each fund is demonstrated on this slide. A strong and diverse economy is defined as one with a diverse economic base, robust job growth, business retention and recruitment, a thriving downtown, and tourism. Key services and programs provided by the City of Salem and Urban Renewal Agency include working with economic development partners to grow local companies and jobs, developing capital projects and grants for development and redevelopment within Salem's 7 urban renewal areas, permitting private, commercial, and residential development, marketing and promoting Salem, cultural activities in the downtown and convention center, operating the municipal airport, and ensuring available parking for business and economic activity. Salem's economy continues to be active, and there is much to report in terms of business recruitment and retention. In addition to announcements of development at the Mill Creek Corporate Center, with assistance from our programs and local partners, local businesses have grown from startups into successful companies. The Small Business Retention and Expansion Program uses direct mail, phone, and in-person visit outreach to traded sector businesses with less than 25 employees. Through this outreach, staff connects businesses with a variety of resources to help them stay and grow in Salem. Since last April, more than 140 small business contacts have been made in the North Gateway, West Salem, and Fairview urban renewal areas. City staff partnered in the development of a monthly tech luncheon to support networking within Salem's technology firms. Through participation in the tech lunch and other networking, staff has learned of several technology firms growing in Salem and new firms considering relocation here. Salem's technology sector represents more than 100 firms and 1,000 employees working in businesses such as Garmin AT, UTC Fire and Security, Open Dental Software, and BookBite. Staff continues to support the growth of this important sector and is engaging in targeted outreach to determine the needs of new companies. The broadband feasibility study identified in the city's strategic plan, to which I will later speak, is also expected to coincide with this outreach. In our April update to Council on Economic Development Activity, reported that the development and interest and construction activity continues to grow in the Mill Creek Corporate Center. Construction of the 1 million square foot Amazon distribution facility is expected to be complete in August 2018. PAC Trust has developed 2 buildings totaling 110,000 square feet for targeted industrial and commercial uses, and these facilities are also expected to be completed in 2018. Construction of 2 additional buildings is expected to start this year. Construction of 2 new private hangars at Salem Municipal Airport is underway. The city is beginning the next phase of the airport business plan with the support of a graduate student intern from the University of Oregon. This effort will be completed in late 2018 and will include evaluating demand for new industrial and commercial uses, additional corporate hangars, and educational and avionic uses to increase economic activity at the Salem Municipal Airport. The business plan will also include a strategy for marketing. Pacific Office Automation, an Oregon headquartered company and largest office equipment dealer in the United States, opened a new location in downtown Salem in 2018, pictured here on this slide. The company purchased a long-term vacant building at the corner of Liberty and Chemeketa Street Northeast to occupy about 7,800 square feet on the ground floor for 50 new staff at the location. Additional jobs will come to the site as businesses lease the remaining 22,000 square feet of tenant space. One of the priorities identified as part of the strategic plan is to explore the possibility of bringing city-provided high-speed internet to downtown. In 2018, a consultant-led market analysis will assess the need and demand for high-speed broadband network and free Wi-Fi in the downtown. The assessment will identify the location of the existing conduit and recommend a model that will have the greatest return on investment should the city move forward with a pilot project in municipal broadband service. The analysis and recommendations may be completed within 6 months of funding. If the downtown focus study shows city broadband is feasible, the work could be expanded to investigate the feasibility of extending broadband to other urban renewal areas and locations in the city. The Riverfront Downtown Urban Renewal Program offers grants to private party owners for the seismic retrofit of buildings. Expanded marketing outreach is planned to ensure more property owners are aware of these resources. The activities and programs supported by the Cultural and Tourism Fund are included in the services under Strong and Diverse Economy in recognition of their impact on tourism and Salem's overall economy. Cultural and Tourism Fund dollars support Salem Convention Center marketing, Salem tourism promotion, maintenance and improvements to city-owned historic and recreation facilities, landscape maintenance at numerous city parks, and a robust grant program benefiting historic and cultural amenities and providing funding for a variety of events in the community. At $4.67 million, the proposed fiscal year 2019 budget includes about $294,000 for convention center marketing, $1.1 million for tourism promotion, $1.66 million for landscape maintenance and improvements to city parks, and $226,500 for maintenance and improvements at historic city-owned facilities. The budget also obligates $600,000 for grants, representing an increase of 30.8% over the prior year's allocation. The grants support the operation of 9 cultural or historic facilities and 27 special events scheduled throughout the upcoming fiscal year. The information about the Cultural and Tourism Fund and the projects it supports begins on page 76 of the financial summaries and page 282 of the Strong and Diverse Economy Service Area. And with that, staff is now available to take your questions related to the Urban Renewal Agency budget and services within Strong and Diverse Economy.
Member Bennett.
Casey, what is the kind of projected timeline on the high-speed internet and free Wi-Fi study? Do we have a timeline on that? I just can't recall it.
So I'll ask Director Rutherford. I believe that an RFP is in process. The timeline I'm aware of, it's about 6 months once a contractor's on
This
board.
year, then?
Kristen Rutherford, Urban Development Director. So it would be in the upcoming budget year. We don't have the funding allocated for it this fiscal year. So we will be working to be able to launch the RFP starting in the new fiscal year. But I wanted to clarify whether your question was tied to the issuance of the RFP and the study or an actual implementation?
Both.
Okay. So once the RFP is on the street and the work begins.
And that'll be when again?
We're looking at getting that out the door to consultants at the beginning of this upcoming fiscal year.
So July,
August timeframe, yes.
Okay.
And then once a consultant is on board, we expect that will be about a 6-month effort.
Okay. And then it will come back to the Urban Renewal Agency, or will it
yes.
come back to the Budget Committee next budget cycle?
It would likely come back first to the Urban Renewal Agency.
Okay. And that could be as soon as,
Probably
Christmas?
mid-year, mid-fiscal year or spring.
okay, yeah, December, January? Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, we'd like to have that information before we head into the next budget cycle.
Okay, great, thank you.
Member Cook?
Thank you, Ms. Chair. I just had an additional question about the urban renewal budget. The South Waterfront Urban Renewal Area, it looks like there's funds to be determined for a future committed project. I just wondered if there would be any more information about that, or
What page are you on, please?
page 45, 46, and 47. It looks like there are some de jure funds, the committed to future projects, short-term borrowing, other revenues, working capital, but it's the commitment but not specified, so just wondering about that.
Hi. So in the South Waterfront Urban Renewal Area, we have a very limited number of projects in that plan. We do not have a project in the upcoming budget. I think the first project that will occur will be a contribution to removing the concrete cap over the creek and daylighting that creek. Once we take that through the permitting process. So right now, everything is in sort of unspecified, and when we have that first project moving forward, we would come back, as we have in the past with other urban renewal areas, and do a transfer from unallocated to a specific project.
In the creek that Kristen is referring to as Pringle Creek?
And then the future projects are tied to pedestrian improvements, trail improvements through that area.
Thank you, Director Rutherford.
Member Anderson?
Thank you. Stay up, Kristen. And this is kind of more of a council question, I think, than a budget question, but I was very interested when Casey said the Fairview Industrial Park is no longer collecting revenue. Do we still have debt there?
No, we do not have debt any longer.
So what is it still doing as a urban renewal district if you don't have debt and we're not collecting revenue?
We have cash. We have cash, about $2 million still to spend in that urban renewal area. And the decision in terms of what to spend that on is on hold pending the outcome of the airport business plan, because a section of that urban renewal area overlays the airport.
Got it.
Once we complete the airport business plan, we will have a better idea of what sort of infrastructure investments or incentives for development on the kind of the southern portion of the airport might be necessary.
So if that wasn't there, the cash or any cash that might be remaining over after any improvements are done at that end, that goes back to the general fund then?
It would go back to the other taxing districts. So we would get our percentage of it, and the rest would go to other taxing districts.
I understand that, and Councilor Nanke is very good at whispering in my ear about what I don't know. Yeah, but where, no, sometimes it's not a whisper. But
I whisper very well.
takes one to know one. But so where does that money that we have left over that gets allocated among all the other taxing districts, where does it end up in our balance sheet? In general fund or someplace else?
If we were to close down the district and return that, it would need to stay within the boundaries of the urban renewal area, because it would be, I think it would come back as program income when that's closed, because it was proceeds of bond funding tied to the urban renewal area.
You mean it would need to be spent in that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so when you have program income, which can be realized from sale of property, rental income, other things, it is tied to the urban boundary of the urban renewal area.
So whatever money is left over eventually will have to get spent in that same urban renewal area.
Yes.
So it doesn't go to benefit anything else, except the benefit is because the tax has gone up, the tax base has gone up, so that will benefit the general fund. This is more of a general basic question. You know, to collect tax increment, the agency must have debt. So how do we go about getting debt? And, you know, to whom are we in debt? And do we have to figure out projects so we can then get debt? so then we can spend it?
Yes, you have to have the projects.
Okay, and does
And
that
they-
have something to do with the fact that a lot of the revenues we are receiving are matched almost dollar for dollar with the expenditures we are making in some of the districts?
If I'm understanding you, yes. So
Yeah.
we have the tax increment that we collect, and then to spend that money, we have to have a debt instrument.
Yeah.
So revenue matching those expenditures
Okay,
through a
so
debt
your debt
instrument, and the debt
instrument is a
instrument could
bond?
be, it can be a bond.
Okay.
It can be overnight debt financing, the
Yeah.
du jour bond.
Which we do on a regular
Yes.
basis.
It can also be
Properly
a
so.
contractual agreement. So if you have a big transportation project with
Okay.
a large contract,
Sure.
you can also, that would also qualify as your debt. We typically don't do that because when you use the contracts as your debt, it's harder to track your maximum indebtedness. It's
Sure.
much easier with the bond or the du jour bonds.
All right, thank you.
Member Bassett?
Good, thank you, Chair Moore Green. I had a question about Fairview that Member Anderson was just talking about, and on page 25, looking at the map. It was a question that we talked about at the pre-meeting at noon today, and I just would like to highlight it for the full members. There's $2 million there. It's being kind of held for the airport. And there's a 40-acre piece of city property, of state property. The Hillcrest School has been vacant for a year. It's 40 acres. It has, I don't know, close to 1 million square feet of historic buildings. And it's right on the edge of the Fairview urban renewal area. The state has torn down a number of historic buildings. We didn't, we got a chance to save some of them in around the state hospital. Maybe haven't saved many of them in the old Fairview. But to have these buildings that have metal roofs on them, they're in good shape. They just had HVAC replaced in some of them the last 3 years ago. I asked today at lunch if anybody's looking at the possibility of an opportunity to use some of those buildings. I was told that a small area of that could potentially be included. You're allowed to expand an urban renewal agency up to 20%. And so I would like to just ask if there was interest from the staff or members of the committee to look at asking staff to identify a feasibility study for the reuse of some of those historic buildings. And so I just wanted to raise that as a possibility and see if it has any traction with other members. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Bassett. And if I'm not mistaken, this is much more of a policy decision, and I think wonderful ideas. I know that Kristen commented earlier today, they're always looking for great ideas, and I think that's something that should be discussed at council level and not necessarily here at the Budget Committee.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. You're right.
Okay, thank you. Member Cook.
Thank you, Chair Moore Green. I just had a question about the $1 million. Sorry, I'm going to try and look at you and still talk through the mic. So the $1 million to spend, and it needs to be set in that urban renewal area.
Are you speaking about Fairview?
About the Fairview area,
So
yes, ma'am.
it's about $2 million.
$2 million. Are we limited in the sense that I see the need for, transitional housing. We have done programs like that before. Within that area, do you see that being a good fit? I know there's more industrial stuff in the area. How have you thought about that $2 million?
That to use it for housing purposes would require a plan amendment because that's not contemplated as a project within the plan. So we
Is
would
it
have to
just
go
strictly
through a
for
process. to do
industrial
that.
business then in that region?
Yes.
Or park?
So there, you would have zoning issues.
Okay.
And I'm not aware of whether or not there are any pockets within that urban renewal area that would allow housing. So that would have to be investigated.
Okay.
And assuming that we could find a location where housing would be allowed, then we would have to amend the plan to add a housing project. So
Okay.
it's eligible for the funding.
Thank you.
I would ask a question, Director Rutherford, about what the ultimate benefit is of the the urban renewal agencies. I think Councilor Anderson's question maybe confused me.
That happens all the time.
If we could go back in the slide to the, in the deck to the sort of, the bar graph. And that speaks my language. So I guess when you get to the green part of the bar graph, the urban renewal agency area has been closed and it's been returned to general collections. Is that correct?
That's correct. It
Okay.
goes back to being distributed among all the affected taxing districts.
Okay, so is there any restriction? Do those collections, whatever the percentage is to the city, just come back to the city unencumbered, or?
Yes.
Okay. So there's no further restriction?
Correct.
Okay. I think I didn't understand the response, so that conforms to my thinking.
Yes.
Okay.
Fairview is a unique situation because it's cash on hand that's resulting from prior bond issuance.
So you're talking about the $2.2 million balance. If you were to say, we're going to close it and be done with it, you would have to split that funding and use that funding within that area.
Yes.
Okay.
Councilor McCoy?
Specifically with Fairview, Kristen, is that back on everybody's tax rolls now, or it will not go back until you spend the money?
It's back on the
back.
tax
We're not
rolls now. We're
collecting.
under levying that area.
So can you give some description of what the final benefit was to the taxing jurisdictions?
Sure, with Fairview specifically? Yes. If I can grab something from my binder real quickly. This is our second urban development annual report. And within the annual report, we have graphs that show what the assessed valuation was at the time a district was created, and what the growth in assessed valuation is, and what that return on investment was. So within Fairview, there was an 832% return on investment from the base assessed valuation to the growth in assessed valuation. So the assessed valuation grew by around $170 million.
Okay. Thank you. Member McCoy?
So to put that in numbers, that went from 20-some million to 170 million.
Yeah. Yeah, because this was state-owned property when it came onto the tax roll, so it had a very low valuation.
Member Nanki was next. Are you?
He was whispering.
Member Anderson?
That's about 22 years, right? If it started in 95, so it's 22 or 23 years?
Around that. And the lifespan of urban renewal areas are somewhere between 20 to 40 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Member Nanki?
Thank you. And just to kind of pull on that as well, and that's why it's wonderful when we get state property that was never on the tax rolls to become an urban renewal area. The increase is massive in that respect. So, but yeah, you see the potential of the blue fixed base. If it were not to become an area where we would do projects, that valuation could actually go down. And instead, when it comes back on the rolls, all the taxing jurisdiction see a massive benefit from that, albeit there's an ROI still for that down the line because they forewent that revenue split for 20 years. So I'm trying to remember what the payback was in years. I know I used to keep it in my desk drawer because Councilor Rogers used to ask every year. Yeah, it's a good thing.
Okay. Any other questions? Very good. Shall we proceed with the safe community? If there are no other. Okay.
Thank you. Staff is available to take your questions.
Good job.
Where's the teleprompter when you need it? With the exception of infrastructure, the city dedicates the largest portion of available funding toward a safe community. The proposed 2019 budget recommends more than $106 million be directed toward this area. This slide breaks down the $106 million in safe community expenditures among the municipal court, community development, fire and emergency medical response, legal prosecution, police, radio communications, the police record system, Willamette Valley Communications Center, or WVCC's 911 dispatching, and the replacement and trust funds for the acquisition of emergency response vehicles and equipment. A safe community is one that provides an effective emergency response while proactively reducing the risk of crime, fire, natural disasters, and health emergencies to residents, businesses, and property owners. The primary services Salem provides to ensure a safe community include emergency response by police, fire, ambulance services, and the dispatching of 911 calls for 29 service agencies, preparation within the community for natural and other emergencies, ensuring buildings in the community are safe for occupants, removal or abatement of graffiti in coordination with other departments to address nuisances, and municipal court administration, criminal prosecution, and violation adjudication. As mentioned last week during the safe and efficient infrastructure discussion, work is underway to ensure the Salem Police Department can conduct business efficiently and safely. A new station will meet current seismic standards for police station and bring together important police functions that are currently located off-site in separate and leased buildings. The department is actively engaged in planning for the new facility and other key aspects of communication and outreach. In the current fiscal year, the Salem Police Department has replaced its records management system, worked with the Salem Police Foundation and community to secure additional funding for procuring a mobile command vehicle, and at one point attained the goal of full staffing. The department continues to experience an increase in serious personal and property crimes categorized as Part 1 crimes. The Chief of Police reports that even at full staffing, available response resources are not keeping pace with demands for services. These demands come from a number of areas, including the downtown, when merchants and others encounter an individual experiencing an addiction, mental health, housing, or other crisis. The police department also oversees the operations of the city's radio communications and emergency dispatch services. Work continues on a new radio system that is compatible with standards for interoperability, allowing responders from different departments and agencies to communicate in emergency situations. The Willamette Valley Communications Center is moving forward on a number of technological and resiliency upgrades. The current phone system is being replaced with a more advanced system that helps screen unintentional wireless calls. The computer-aided dispatch system has reached the end of its useful life, and an RFP is in process to replace the system. The backup dispatch center in Marion County is receiving upgrades to promote continuity of operations in the event that the backup center is needed. With notable member agency looking at the possibility of relocating to a different dispatch center, WVCC will look at options to sustain the high-quality services to all its remaining member agencies. The Municipal Court Division of the City Manager's Office continues to look for ways to improve the efficiency of its operations and enhance the sense of safety in the courtroom. Following Judge Jane Aiken's request for improved safety last year, staff from legal, risk management, and facilities have worked with the municipal court to put in some added security measures. Perhaps the most significant occurring this fiscal year is the implementation of video arraignment, which allows most inmates at Marion County Jail to make appearances before a municipal judge while in a holding cell. And that precludes the needs to transport the inmates to the courtroom. Discussions are occurring with Polk County Corrections to make similar arrangements for appearance of their inmates by video arraignment. The Salem Fire Department's trend of increasing call volume followed suit in 2017. The department responded to about 23,500 calls for service, including more than 12,000 Priority 1 emergency calls. The number of fire-related calls increased 21%, or by 95 additional fires reported, and calls for medical service increased by about 6.5%, or by more than 1,000 calls. With the increasing call volume, the department is now responding to an average of 63 calls per day, or one every 22 minutes. With the help of the Fire Foundation and other community partners in Salem, the fire department is working to increase the number of available responders to provide life-saving CPR. Since the inception of the CPR training classes for students in the Salem-Keizer region in 2015, over 10,000 individuals have been trained in CPR and AED usage. Due to this and other efforts of the department to promote quality outcomes following a heart attack, Salem's survival rate is at 57%, more than double the national average of 28%. To address some of the previously mentioned resource issues related to public safety, 2 council policy agenda items are included in the city manager's recommended budget: the reopening of Station 11 on Orchard Heights Road Northwest and a sobering center. Fire Station 11 on Orchard Heights Road Northwest was closed in 2012. Since that time, the city has experienced approximately a 24% increase in calls for service and a decline in the rate of response within the 5.5-minute standard. With the reinstatement of Engine 11, response times within the performance standard are expected to increase by 2.6% to 73%, equating to approximately 350 more individuals receiving the desired response time when experiencing a critical emergency. This action will add resource capacity in West Salem and improve citywide reliability for fire and emergency medical response. The cost for the initial fiscal year of operations is about $1.25 million. In future years, the annual cost for the entire fiscal year will be in excess of $1.45 million. To be financially sustainable beyond June 30th, 2020, without compromising the city's fiscal health or ability to provide other services, the reopening of Fire Station 11 is recommended in fiscal year 2019, with future additional revenue consideration by the City Council. The city, Marion County, Salem Health, and social service agency partners have developed a framework for a sobering center as recommended by the Mid-Willamette Homeless Initiative Task Force. The 2018 Council Policy Agenda calls for the opening of a center to offer individuals a safe location for sobering and reduce the demand for needed emergency services and hospital beds. The facility is planned to have 8 to 10 beds and be operated by a nonprofit addiction treatment provider on a 24-hour per day basis. Salem's anticipated contribution to the effort is $200,000 annually from the general fund. And that concludes the presentation on Safe Community and for this evening, and staff is prepared to address the Budget Committee member questions at this time.
Member Bennett.
Thank you. Just a comment on the last 2 items. I just can't thank the manager enough for the work he's done with the fire chief to reopen Station 11. I think it's, I have felt for some time it's overdue. I was really pleased to see it show up in the budget. Just, I think it's going to really add to service in West Salem and the general safety of the community by adding another engine company. And I hope we'll take up the challenge on how this is going to be paid for as a sustainable service. And then second, the Sobering Center is a badly needed program, strongly endorsed by the police chief as well as the sheriff, the county commissioners, and the hospital. And I'm just really pleased that we were able to proceed with that. And I want to acknowledge the state of Oregon and its help in putting that together. I think this has been a really great, another really good project of city, state, and county working together. So I'm real pleased to see that coming along. Thank you.
Member Cook.
Thank you, Chair Moore Green. I just wanted to say I was really happy to see GIS mentioned under the technology report of the budget, that they're centralizing the resources, and I think that the GIS services the city provides are very beneficial for multiple programs. I did have a question about the police budget with the, I was wondering about the records management, if that was in relation to the records and evidence room, or if that was in relation to body cams or footage. It didn't really go into the specific, it probably did, and I just didn't find the page for the deep dive. But I just had some questions in regards to that with the safety budget.
And Chief can correct me if I misstated anything here, but my understanding is that is more of a software type system that is shared among multiple agencies where they can access things such as criminal history or confidential information related to individuals that may be investigated or other records that are needed for police purposes.
So is it the same one that fire uses then too?
No.
No. Okay. Sorry, Chief.
Good evening, Chair Moore Green and members of the Budget Committee. My name is Jerry Moore. I'm the Chief of Police. Our records management system is what is the system that takes in all of our reports that all of our officers write. It It allows them to write the reports in the field, and then they go into our records section, and they accumulate there, and they keep track of all our records.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Chair. So for the body cams, is there an ongoing software fee for that, or the maintenance with the evidence? I'm just wondering how that figures in, or the count, because it wasn't specifically, I didn't find it where I was expecting to find it.
Counselor, we don't have body cams. That's the first thing. We have cars in some of our cameras in some of our cars, and that goes into the evidence system, and I'm not sure if it goes into the records management system. I don't believe it does. It goes into a separate system with in our evidence section, but we do not have body cams.
Thank you, Chief.
Okay. Member Nordike.
Thank you. I note that, again, in regards to our police budget, the materials state on page 240, quote, although Salem is experiencing a rise in crime rates, which is mirrored across the country, there are no new positions requested in this budget cycle. And then turning to page 231 of our materials, I very much appreciate the breakdown of service area statistics, which sheds a little more light in terms of what that crime increase looks like. And it says aggravated assault, 15% increase and some change. Robberies, 31% increase. Burglaries, 8.1% increase. But most strikingly is the increase in motor vehicle thefts. And all these numbers are in comparison to the year 2016. It says there's a 43.7% increase in motor vehicle thefts. So I see that, I find that interesting. And I'm just wondering, when I take a look at where your police personnel break out, I'm curious in terms of, Chief Moore, are you allocating more resources to address the increase in particularly motor vehicle thefts? And because I don't believe it's clearly set forth in our high-level review here. So I'd just like to hear what efforts you're engaging in to address that.
Well, motor vehicle thefts are an interesting situation for us. It's our belief that the majority of motor vehicle thefts probably occur to support drug habits or other criminal behavior. We have not been able to add resources to our detective division to increase our investigation of motor vehicle thefts. But I will tell you, there was a recent Ninth Circuit Court decision, I believe it was, or an Oregon decision, that made it very difficult to prosecute offenders that we arrest in stolen cars unless we can actually prove or they admit that they knew it was a stolen car. Simply being in a stolen car does not allow us to prosecute individuals, and it's a frustration for police and the community and, of course, the district attorney. We believe that because those aren't being enforced, that people continue to do that without fear of prosecution in many cases. So we believe that that drives a lot of the motor vehicle thefts. We believe we do a fairly good job investigating them. Our issue is whether we can prosecute, and so we haven't had the resources to add additional officers to our motor vehicle or detective division this year.
Member Haslett?
Yes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. Chief, I have one question for you. On field operations, you show 110 people at $17,316,560. You add one person in 19, but it goes up over $500,000.
Could you show me what page you're on?
Page 241.
Reorganization. Yeah.
Can I perhaps help out?
Yeah.
That the program budget, I want to remind everyone that the program budget is not just the FTE, it's also all of the other costs, what we call materials and services costs, or capital outlay. It's all the costs for that program. So when you see an increase like that, it certainly is the result of an increase in personal services costs, but it's also all the other costs too. So it could be that some costs were distributed to that program, to that particular program area that far exceeded what was there last year. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but it's really not spelled out. I mean, when you look at numbers and you're crunching numbers, especially budget-wise, then, you know, a $500,000 jump for one additional.
Sure, but just saying that it's likely not the addition of that person. It's the addition of other program expenses related to that budget. Sometimes it can be for, depending upon the budget, it can be some pretty significant equipment, vehicles. I mean, certainly we can pursue this and find out exactly what caused that jump.
Member Lewis?
Yeah, I want to echo the comments about opening Fire Station 11. We certainly have been waiting for this day. It still is not, not something that we are overly assured about that we can continue to pay for, and we are using this as an example to talk about increased revenue. But my only question is, and we've talked about this before, the hiring and preparation for the opening of the station on January. I just want to make sure that the fire department it feels confident that they can reach that goal by January of 2019.
Thank you, Councilor. Mike Niblock, Fire Chief. Yes, that's a typical recruitment phase for us is about 6 months. We've already begun. We have an academy starting May 14th this year, a normal academy, which will bring us up to full staffing for a few minutes. That's how it works. It's hard to stay at full staffing, but we do attempt to do that. So we have already begun recruiting for the academy. If this is successful in the budget, then we'll be ready to pull the trigger on that and have the recruitment done, and testing. Academy would actually start in October, and 2-3 month academy, and they'd be in service January 1st of 2019.
Thank you.
Member Cook, did you have a question about fire or police?
I think we're good.
Great, thank you. Member Anderson.
Thank you. Stay up there, Chief. I'm looking at page 229 of the budget, and I think this kind of relates to the opening of the station, but there's 3 items at the middle of the page there about the fire department responding to priority emergencies within 5.5 minutes, response en route within 60 seconds, and deliver effective response force to structure fire with 10 minutes. And one of those, the middle one, you're at 95%, and the other 2 you're down in the mid-70s.
Right.
Could you discuss why that happens that way, and is it related some way to the fact that we don't have Station 11 over there on the west side?
So I'll take that chapter and verse because there's a couple of questions in that query.
At least
so
a couple.
The first one is response times, the 5.5 minute standard that we try to achieve 85% of the time. We're at 73 and change. Actually, right now, we're up about 9% in our call volume this year, and this month we were at 70%, so we had a pretty significant drop in our response time percentage this month. So that's concerning. So that's all about resources, all about call availability. The Deputy City Manager mentioned that we were running about 63 calls a day. Well, this year we're running about 70. So you just spread the resources out further, and so you have more increased workload that adds to that.
And it's part of that problem that you have to take Station 1 across
exactly. It's a domino effect.
Yeah.
The second category, the turnout times. So that is the time it takes. So we allot 60 seconds for that.
Yeah, you're smoking on that one. No pun
We still have room
intended.
for improvement. I think we can still do better there. And that is the time that the first unit being dispatched goes en route to that call. So the ambulances help us out with that. Fire trucks help us out with that. Our 10-year objective is we want to be around 97% on that one, because that's something we can physically control, how fast we get out of the station. And the third one was effective firefighting force. Again, that's a resource issue, so we want to be able to deliver 16 firefighters to the fire scene during a structure fire for the critical tasks that we've got to carry out. And so we have a benchmark for that as well. The first unit stops the clock, and the other units get there as the tasks unfold. And that's important in a structure fire, so you've got to be able to do certain things in sequence to have a good outcome.
one final question, if I may, Chair Morgreen. So would it be your belief that adding Fire Station 11 is going to increase both of those ones that are in the 70s?
So yes, the Station 11 will help us citywide about 2.5% to our response time standard. Now remember, we're looking backwards when we do those calculations, so they're an estimate. If our call volume goes up 5,000 this year, it might be a zero.
Right. Okay.
But looking at 2016 numbers, if we had Engine 11 in service, we'd be 2.5 to 26% better citywide, about 14% better in West Salem's district.
Okay.
So huge increase on that side of the
Good.
river.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
If I could ask another question in another area on this. I don't have a question for the fire chief unless somebody else has one.
Well, we have them up there, and I know Member McCoy and Member Kaiser had questions. Was it a fire? Okay, go ahead, Member Kaiser. Thank you.
Thank you, and it's not for the chief, I'm sorry. I think it's more for City Manager Powers, and I'm looking on page 4 regarding Fire Station 11 reopening, but I think it's in the second paragraph under Fire Station 11 reopening, and it says to be financially sustainable beyond June 30th, 2020 without compromising city's fiscal health, yada, yada, yada. Reopening Fire Station 11 is recommended with the development of a public safety fee for consideration by City Council. So my questions are, the funding for Fire Station 11 for this fiscal year and perhaps fiscal year 20 is coming out of our general fund, presumably from our working capital. Could you just speak a little bit to the public safety fee, since it shows up a couple times in the budget document, and what we might be considering and when it might come to council?
Certainly, thank you for that opportunity, Member Kaiser. The point I was trying to make with my yada yada yadas is that number one, the leadership team, the department heads, really helped me create the proposed budget, and we relied very heavily on the council's strategic plan and policy agenda. And we tried to strike a balance between being responsive to that policy priority setting, the needs of the community, as was said earlier, needs that really have been existing for many years, and still being certainly cognizant of the challenge that we have as a service provider to really align our current revenues with current expenditures. I did not mean to, and I want to really emphasize this, I did not mean to link Station 11 directly to a public safety fee. Station 11 is a significant expenditure that's going to accelerate the challenge we have with those recurring revenues and recurring expenditures, and you'll see more of that as you requested last week. You'll see that when we present an updated forecast to you next week. But I wanted to really use the opportunity of adding back some significant service capacity to the work that council has already started in the strategic planning with the sustainable services and the revenue work, and to really, again, provide that recommendation that we need to really put some focused administrative work. We owe you that. You've seen some analysis from staff on some options, and certainly then the council's policy willingness to weigh in and vet and discuss options. May not be a public safety fee. Our thought was that made some sense, but if council wanted to go in a different direction, that would be good as well. The challenge is really getting our revenues and expenditures aligned. And fundamentally, it's a problem of a state land use system that's now completely out of whack, out of sync with the state system to fund local government.
If I could just respond really quick. I think, thank you for the explanation, and I think it's important to note that, reopening Fire Station 11 is essentially bringing online more to our public safety. It's not necessarily that it's just this one thing that's going to cause, us to have these financial imbalances. It's looking at the whole system and looking at a way of raising revenue. And if we want these types of services as a community, we have to make hard choices about what we spend our money on, and something like a public safety fee might be part of that to get what we want as a community. So, thank you.
Member McCoy?
This goes back to the police. I have some questions there. It's sort of in line with what we were just talking about, Chief. On 230 and 231, you've got a bunch of numbers, daily calls. The first one I have a question on, because I can't quite suss it out. You've got calls for service, average 300 or 9,100, 300 a day, 9,100 a year. Then you got 911 calls for received by the police, 210 and 6,300. Then non-emergency calls received by the police, 220 and 67. How many calls a year are you dealing with? Is it 300 or is it, what is that, 730? Is it 730 calls a day and whatever that is, 21,000 calls a year?
No, I understand your question, Counselor. You're looking at really two separate pieces of information. One of them is what our 911 call center handles on a daily basis, and the other one, the 300 calls or so for service, is what the Salem Police Department handles on a daily basis. We handle approximately 300 calls a day, just the police department. The number of calls received in the 911 calls are for 29 police and fire agencies, and I believe that's what...
But this says for Salem Police. Specifically.
Which page are you on?
It's on 230. It says 911 calls received for Salem Police.
I got you. We receive those calls. Some of those may be dispatched, some of them may not be dispatched, depending on what the incident is. It could go to another department in the city, or it could go to our TRO's office, where we don't actually send a police officer out. So that could be what that
so
number is.
that's sort of, I was just starting to tell, and then you got non-emergency calls received. So that means you don't send a car or a policeman to that?
Very often we would send a police officer on a non.
I guess what I'm getting, that's a lot of
911
calls. So my number of 510, 730 could be close, depending on what's going on with the 911 calls and what.
That's correct.
But it's more like 500 or 600 calls a day totally, right? Is that fair to say? You're just sort of shortchanging yourself a little the way you listed them, I think. But
yeah, I would say we handle report calls. We handle probably 300 or so on an average. There's a whole lot of things we do during the day that we don't actually get a number for, that we don't really track. I think when I tell you we have 300 calls for service that generate a police number or an activity, that doesn't count the number of contacts we have or the number of situations we encounter on the street where we deal with people. And some of those, quite frankly, take a considerable amount of time in our daily work. So handling 300 calls and dealing with the other things that we do certainly has an impact on our organization.
One other question now to what we were just talking about to some degree with just public service and public safety in general. When we're looking at increases, as Vanessa said here, down below on crime increases in some areas, is it safe to say, or is it accurate to say that if you had more officers on the street, those numbers would go down?
I don't know if you can make that.
Well, we would better be able to deal with those situations, that's for sure. I'm always hesitant on saying why crime goes up or goes down. When it goes down, I feel really great, but I'm afraid to take credit for it because it's going to go up the next year, and I don't know how I'm going to answer. So I'm just going to tell you, we're a busy organization, and quite frankly, our officers many times go from call to call. They don't have a lot of time to deal with the situation, or they have to deal with the situation, which makes our response time go up in many cases. So, excuse me. I think, obviously, additional resources always help us investigate and take care of situations.
I guess then that's my final question. Is there any specific course of action you'd be looking at that we haven't budgeted for to help those numbers go back down? I'll rephrase the question.
Well, I could give you a list of officers that I'd like to add in particular areas, without a doubt.
So there is, I mean, your response to some degree is we'd have, in a perfect world, you'd be coming to us asking for more personnel to deal with the issues you need to deal with in the city.
Thanks. That is absolutely correct. If the finances were in such a situation, I would probably be here asking for additional resources.
Okay, thank you.
Member Cook.
Thank you, Chair Moore Green. Chief, I just had another question. With regards to the increased staff for 2019, it looks like there was a request for one increased staff. Just to piggyback off what Member McCoy had asked, how many people do you have in crime prevention at this point? And would that shift percentage-wise, given more staffing, to be able to dedicate resources to moving upstream from some of these crimes of opportunity?
Right. If I added additional staff, they wouldn't go to crime prevention right now, I can tell you that. We have one police officer and one management analyst, I believe, that take care of our crime prevention. They report to a sergeant, but that sergeant has so many other responsibilities that he really isn't a member of crime prevention. He just oversees the operation. The one position that we added this year, I believe, was in personnel and training. And what we did was we civilianized the position so that we could take an officer that we had in there and put him back out on the road.
Thank you.
Member Anderson.
Thank you. It's not for you, Chief. We're moving on. I think this is for Casey or maybe for Norm, who hasn't said anything yet tonight. I'm looking at page 234, where it says, what's new in this budget and workforce changes. Last paragraph there says, proposed budget also includes an increased allocation to the Neighborhood Enhancement Division in the general fund to augment code compliance assistance to building and safety for enforcement of the building code. That sounds like you're talking about another employee, or is it something else?
Go ahead.
Yeah, Norman Wright, Community Development Director. That is an increased allocation, yes, but it's an increased allocation from building safety to help pay for a current officer that we have that enforces those building safety violations that we find out in the field. So it isn't a new employee, a new FTE, but it's an increase in the amount of funding from building safety for one of the dedicated, otherwise general fund FTEs that are working in neighborhood enhancement.
So what do you mean by that? Does that mean you're not paying that from general fund, you're paying that someplace else? Or
We're paying it more from building safety than we were from general fund.
Okay, but the actual feet on the ground is the same?
Yes.
Okay, or are the same?
That's correct.
Thanks. And then my other question is for the municipal court. And my question is, it says they're adding funding for contracted security services through a private provider, and I'm just wondering if you could explain, did you consider making that a city employee, or why did you go to a private provider?
Can you give me a budget page, please?
Yes, I can. It's 233. Right-hand corner, upper right-hand corner.
It was in terms of looking at the schedule needed and the hours required for coverage. We do have security officers that are provided by the private sector at the library, and they are able to accommodate and tailor our schedule well for the needs so that we could adjust according to court schedules and have the appropriate personnel available for security response versus someone who may be full-time or on a schedule that doesn't necessarily coincide with the court schedule and allow us to be most efficient with those use of dollars.
So what you're saying is it's cheaper to contract it out than it is to have an internal employee?
That's correct.
Good, thanks.
Member Cook?
Thank you, Chair Moore Green. I had a question in regards to the public safety and fire. About the potential for...
Page number?
Well, I mean, page 4 and just looking at 237. I was trying to look at the kind of calls that fire goes on, because we know time is a factor both with fire and with medical. Everything's time sensitive. And then looking at the introduction, as city manager Power said, of a public safety fee, I would like to ask the chief, of the type of calls that go out, do you see, sorry, up and down, up and down. Do you see an increase with the type of density housing that's available? If we were to look at a per bed versus a per household, how would that be? What kind of calls are you looking at as far as medical, and how am I trying to phrase this? I'm looking at how would it be the most effective for making sure to have that sustainability built in with the fire needs.
So when we look at call types, we went up in all call types, all of our call types. We've
So
gone
fire
up
across
every
the
year.
board.
Yeah, 95 fires up last year, 1,200 medical calls. We're right around 12,000 priority one, and a priority one call is where we go with our lights and sirens on, where time matters. So that could be a fire, that could be a heart attack, it could be a stroke, it could be major bleeding, it could be a car wreck with injuries, it could be somebody drowning in the river, anything where somebody's breathing difficulty, those kind of calls where if we don't get there fast enough, we can't intervene and they lose their life. So that's the priority one type calls. So we're seeing across the board increases. And Deputy City Manager mentioned 24%. If we go back one more year and we look at the first 4 months of this year, we're seeing like a 32% increase in that time span of our call volume. We're doing a lot of things. We did some heavy analysis this year with our standards of cover to look at why. We still haven't really pinned down why, but it's population increase, it's an aging population, demographics of our area. All those things play into why the call volume is going up. We're also looking at some things we can do in cooperation with other agencies to be able to maybe lessen the impact to the system and have a more robust or efficient use. We're very efficient with our resources, but there may be some things we can do to be a little more efficient with them. And so we're looking at a lot of those areas to be able to improve the service.
And as far as with those high priority calls, when someone has to be admitted to the ER, you have a streamlined service to be able to admit them with less time. So if someone's experiencing a stroke or a heart attack, they don't have to go through you absorb some of that work that the hospital would normally do as a fire department. Am I right in understanding that?
In specific cases, for example, if somebody has an issue where they need to have a catheter placed in their heart, we're able to diagnose part of that in the field. And in communication with the hospital, that patient doesn't go to the ER, they go right to the cath lab into surgery. So we short circuit that, and it's we refer to that as door to balloon time. National average is about 90 minutes for a patient arriving at the hospital to get their stent in place and back to normal. We've had times in the 24 minutes to 36-minute category. So very efficient there. Our rate of being accurate in diagnosing those is in the 85th percentile. And there are some false positives that happen with some of those diagnoses in the field with the 12 leads that we can apply. So things like that help us get faster service. We do have an ambulance entrance that we take patients directly into the ER, so the patients that go are seen very quickly. But it's the busiest ER in the Northwest coast, up and down the coast. So it's a busy place. But we feel like we're able to get our patients in. And our turnaround times, sometimes they're a little longer than we like. And we work with the hospital to try and keep those down so we can get those units back in service as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Chief.
Member McCoy?
I'm looking at the trust fund summary on page 244. Most of those seem self-explanatory. It's got federal and state forfeitures, 500,000, or what is it for next year, 650,000. Is that being held in a trust? Can somebody explain, where does that money go? Just ask it that way.
Well, as the description describes, it is money that the police department receives from civil forfeitures, and it's money that is used to help support police needs, primarily equipment, one-time needs, not recurring needs. And the chief probably can give us some examples of some recent expenditures or planned expenditures for that fund, or from that fund.
The city manager is absolutely correct. There's a variety of ways those funds come in, and I could read a lot of them to you. But state and civil forfeiture is usually criminal activity where the police department is awarded, for lack of a better term, that money. Some of that money goes to other areas such as social service or drug rehab, or so they go elsewhere. So we get a portion of that money. Some of the things that we've purchased over the years have included, I think some of you have ridden in our Bear, our SWAT vehicle. That was completely paid for by trust and agency money. We've had situations where we've had to upgrade the computers in our cars, for instance, and we've used it for that. Some SWAT equipment, some TCU equipment, such as communications equipment, headsets for our motor officers, some crime prevention videos that we've done. So those are the types of things we use the money for.
So does it accrue until you've got identified somewhere you want to spend, or is it in the budget annually to spend money?
It's not budgeted money. It is money that accrues. We never know how much is going to accrue, and that's one of the reasons why we don't budget out of it, because some years it could be 30,000, some years it could be 10.
And I think Budget Officer Jacobs pointed out to me that page 377 has more explanation about the trust funds.
Yes, Member Bergman.
Thank you. I just have a quick question with regard to page 245. It indicates that 10 pallets of surplus equipment were donated to Lima, Peru. And I'm just curious if there's an approximate value with that donation, and I'm curious how that recipient was identified for the donation.
So, great question. That was my new deputy chief of training in EMS. Speaks 5 languages, 5 or 6 languages. I can never have it, but had some contacts in Peru, and through we had a video on our Facebook page go viral. The one with the dollhouse being burnt down to show backdraft and those kind of things, and they saw it in Peru, and they reached out to us. Of course, it was in Spanish, and so Gabe was able to translate it, answer back, and speak back and forth to them in Spanish on our page, and they had a desperate need. We also donate equipment to several towns in Mexico as well. So a lot of these places, folks are going in and fighting fires in blue jeans with no air packs, literally no equipment. So they're really not going in the building very much, but they're not being very effective either. And so we've donated bunker gear. Peru got some bunker gear, and the big portion of the donation was self-contained breathing apparatuses that were 10 years old. So in the United States, they're no longer meet the certification standards for entering a hazard environment for a firefighter. So we couldn't donate them to a small county around us. So they really had no value other than scrap metal value. But they had a value to Peru. They were tickled to get them. They actually sent some representatives down here, trained them, and so it's been a pretty good relationship. And of course, like I said, their needs are huge there. And so we try to, we help out the community colleges when we can. These particular pieces of equipment really couldn't be used in the United States anymore, so we had to go outside the country with them to find a use for them. And we were able to do that.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Member Nordike.
Again, with the musical chairs, Chief Moore. I noticed that on page 247 of the materials that it states that 44 police officers are eligible to retire by December 2020. And I'm curious, I know being eligible for retirement is one thing. And of course, that doesn't speak to how many years of service, which of course drives retirement costs. Is it too soon to tell whether you expect to see a significant budgetary impact, what with these many officers becoming eligible in the years to come?
Great question. I would like to think that they would be similar to what we've experienced over the years, and that's 2, 3, 4 officers retire in a year or so. I guess it's always possible that we could have a huge spike where others could go out, but I think we've probably had the same number of, or similar number of people eligible to retire for many years, and it's just it's just kind of cyclical. If they all went out at once, I think you're right. We'd have a problem. We'd have a whole bunch of different problems, not just money, but. I think it's similar to what we've experienced in the past. It may be a little higher now.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
Thank you. I actually do have a more specific response to Member Hazlett's earlier question. My response, Member Hazlett, was generic, and I do have a specific response in regard to the increase in the year-over-year program cost for field operations, which is on page 241. The increase in cost is almost entirely as the result of personal services. And it represents a 3.3% increase year over year. Now, there is the addition of the position, but there are also costs that increase every year relative to personal services. There are market adjustments, increases to health benefit costs. So that cost increase year over year is just personal services, and 3.3%. Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Thank you. Okay. All right. Okay, very good. The final item that we have under special orders of business this evening is committee discussion. This is an opportunity for the committee to continue any earlier discussions or introduce an issue or concern for the committee's consideration.
This is appropriate.
Yes, Member Cook.
Thank you, Chair Moore Green. Is this appropriate then for the additional amendments that we spoke about earlier with the reports? This would be the appropriate time to bring it up? Or
bear with me, the reports that we requested last week, is that correct?
Right, that are in the packets now.
Right. I believe that we would like to hold that for discussion next week.
Well, however, if you have questions, well, you certainly can. That's up to the Budget Committee. I would point out, as Kelly pointed out at the beginning, that we may not have all staff available, and I'll do my best to answer the questions, but there might be some that I'll be stumped, and others in the room might be stumped as well. So, but certainly we can give it a shot tonight if that's the Budget Committee's desire, and then certainly if there are questions regarding the reports that we can respond to help you next week, please ask those questions tonight.
Thank you for that clarification. So, Member Cook.
Would I be able to ask that question? And if we feel that it would be more appropriate, if we feel it would be more appropriate to wait until next week, I'm fine with that.
Well, I believe City Manager Powers is more than willing to give a go if the committee is willing.
Thank you. I do have a question in regards to the elimination of the DVD rental charge, youth collection overdue fines. It looks like that's amendment. Well, I would say page 1, agenda item 5I. I just had a question because I feel like this report did clarify. It looks like there's some staff time going in from library staff with the transaction fee for the $1 of the DVD and that exchange, and that everything else is self-check. And it looks like from the report, and from some further investigation on this, other libraries in the area have, or within Oregon, have eliminated that DVD fee in order to save on staff time, staff hours. So it's all self-check so that there's no dollar transaction fee.
Well, I would say, I agree with you that the report is clear that there is an impact to staff in regard to the DVD because it's a more manual transaction. But I don't know that this report really states that other libraries have had that fee and have since eliminated it.
So I guess my question would be if this is a savings of staff time, if there's some, I know we were looking at it from the revenue perspective last time. What would staff be able to do? How could staff use their capacity if they weren't doing that interaction for the fee?
And you know, you have just stepped over that line where I can't answer that question, but Community Development Director Norman Wright is here this evening, so if he wants to step up and respond to that question.
I'll do so briefly. Yes, as far as staff time, there isn't a significant amount of time that's dedicated to the checking out of the DVDs. It's more so the cash handling that it's probably the greater concern for staff. But what time would be freed from having to check out the DVDs would be probably dedicated towards some of the more broader experience questions that we get from patrons, just freeing up more time for the demands and the needs that patrons have on everything else related to the library services.
Thank you.
Yes, Member Hazlitt.
On the same item, but a little bit different, on the youth collection overdue fees. I know most people say we ought to do away with that. I disagree with that. Where do you teach responsibility, number one, of bringing stuff back on time? Number two is normally a youth, the parent is the one normally that signs it out, not the youth. So I think all we're doing is just saying, you know, we don't want to deal with it, but I think a fee for being late with something teaches some responsibility.
Thank you. Okay. Member Tigard.
Yeah, thank you. I guess I'm surprised at this point in our budget meetings that we haven't talked about PERS costs at all, and I know we talked about personnel costs in maybe at the end of the last presentation, but I guess I would have expected to hear more conversation about it, just in terms of current impact to the city's budget, future impact, what the forecast looks like.
Sure. And we are planning with the revised projections or forecasts that we're bringing back next time, some additional information on both property taxes and PERS for the Budget Committee. So we'll learn a little more at that time about the specifics of current impacts and what's projected in the future.
Member Cook?
Just some additional questions or concerns maybe for staff regarding the request for sidewalk replacements and sidewalk upkeep. I would be interested in exploring that a little further. And I'm not sure, would I request a work session? Would I request, how would we look at exploring the possibility of moving some of these projects forward? What would be the recommendation?
What projects?
The sidewalk replacement that was brought up at the last Budget Committee meeting, the needs for sidewalks. What?
Brought up by the public?
Mm-hmm.
Well, there would be, it's a two-part answer. One would be additional resources. The second would be a revisit of the policy regarding the prioritization of where sidewalk repairs are made. And certainly we could provide some analysis on if council desires that specific neighborhood to be repaired next year, we could certainly provide that analysis, what that would mean in terms of expense, and what that would mean in terms of a change in policy, and where the impacts would be elsewhere in the city.
Yeah.
Member Anderson and then Bennett.
Just on a follow-up on that, what we hear a lot is, here's a very horrible spot that's in front of my house or down the street from me. We see all these great pictures, and our response right now has been always, we're going in our concentric square method with a strike team that may or may not be operative depending on if we can hire people. I'm wondering if at some point, and this is again more of a council thing, we might want to say, well, maybe do we want to reallocate the resources some way to spend more time on kind of a strike team sort of thing as opposed to just going around in a concentric circle method. That's way out of the scope of the budget committee, but that may be one way we look at it. Let's put more priority on the real bad spots that everybody can tell you where they are, as opposed to just going around in the concentric squares.
And also, to be responsive to Councilor Cook's question, there will be a work session in June, July, probably July, as directed through the strategic plan, through the policy agenda for council to discuss capital improvement strategy and a bonding strategy. And I think as council has discussed previously, as recently as last week, certainly one approach to the types of concerns that we hear, that you hear from your constituents, is to try to do a bigger repair through a bond, for example. So council will have that opportunity in July in a work session setting to have that discussion, and we can certainly either as part of that work session or prior bring some policy options for your consideration on the repair of sidewalks.
And City Manager Powers, if the Budget Committee decided as a priority that this would be something that we would want to dedicate funds to now, am I correct in assuming that that would come out of the working capital as well?
No.
Or there would be no additional, I don't know if the word sources or pots or revenue places, where would that come from? It would need to be working capital for the repairs or for the replacements or for the segments.
That would be my recommendation. The Budget Committee Council could certainly get into the capital improvements budget and reallocate, deferring other needs to focus on sidewalks.
Thank you.
Just a thought. Just a thought on this. One of the problems with trying to deal with this in a piecemeal fashion is certain places will get more piece and meal, and some of your wards will get less piece and meal. And the thing you find when you deal with this issue of sidewalks is it's a citywide issue. It is not confined to any single ward. And I think I think we pay real close attention to the manager's suggestion that we'll look at it as a bond measure. And I think if you'll recall, listening to Bruce Hildebrand, he describes a really huge issue that needs to be dealt with. I listened carefully. The street that was discussed most at our last meeting is right behind me. I know exactly the problem. It is an absolute mess. But then so are parts of the street I live on. Probably Councilor Kaiser lives on one that you don't want to walk at night without a real bright flashlight so you can see the cracks. Yours may be better. You're in a richer part of Northeast, but but it is one that I think we're going to look at. I hope you all will join in that idea of looking at it in a really fulsome manner and do a bond measure. Part of streets and sidewalks. We'll maybe drop the bridges this time. Streets and bridges and sidewalks.
Sidewalks and.
Streets and bridges. Okay, however you want to title it.
I guess I was just struck at the last Budget Committee meeting how we asked, what about the strike force with these? And we heard, well, that's too much that's too intense, that's too big of a project. So it feels like on both ends there's this squeeze. And I fully appreciate the bond approach, and we want to do something comprehensive. At the same time, I feel like, isn't there something we can do in the more immediate bit? But with respect and appreciating where you're coming from.
Well, I just want to assure you that Councilor Kaiser and I would agree with you completely on 15th Street. because it's politically in our neighborhood or ward. That's what you'll get into if you try to cherry pick this thing. And I really suggest look at it in a bigger context, and we can take really a comprehensive solution, which is what we need to look at. I think at this point we can always revisit this, but I'd really leave it open, not take valuable operating funds at this point and allocate them. Wait and look at what we can do with capital funds, and then see if that fulfills what your expectation would be of what we could do.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Member Nanki.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just to look at it from the long-term financing perspective, if we take the major sidewalk repairs, stick it into strike force repair, we take and add to long-term expenditures, because as soon as we fix those sidewalks as we're moving around town, we give them to the owner and we'll never have to fix them again. So depending on how degraded they are, and if we can catch them before they're too degraded to get them to a satisfactory state, give it to the property owner, then they're never ours again, except for street tree root type issues. So it would be nice to just get them all done and out of our hair.
Forgot you're talking about tree cutting too. That'll be exciting. That's another.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. Special times.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Anything else? Yes, Member Casey.
Thank you. I guess I'd like to, following up on this conversation, because I have this conversation nearly every neighborhood association meeting I go to, and with City Manager Powers. I think we were just talking about this on Friday in your office about sidewalks, so it's something that comes up all the time. And I think what I wanted to reiterate was kind of what I said before, is we have a structural imbalance with our city budget. And we're going to face a day in the not too short future where we're going to have to actually make decisions, pretty tough decisions as a community, of what do we want to invest our money in. And one of those decisions might be, do we want to invest in sidewalks? Are we going to not invest in streets? Are we going to invest in police? Are we not going to do that? And that's going to take some really serious conversations with the community. And I know the mayor is looking at forming a revenue committee. And I guess this is kind of my call out to the community, that I hope you will engage with us, because this will affect you. And we need to work together as a community to figure this out, because it's not going to get any better for a while until we can figure out the PERS issue, which is probably going to be a generation before that really starts to solve itself. And we're not going to be able to get rid of Measure 5 anytime soon, so we can collect more property tax revenue. But we're going to have that conversation, and I really hope the community takes it seriously and really engages us. So I'm looking forward to the revenue committee, or whoever's on it, Mr. Mayor, but I think that's one of the most pressing things with the city right now, is identifying additional sources for revenue so we can do all these things that the community wants.
The other, Councilor, I agree with you, and I really think we'll get on it later this summer, early fall. We'll be really engaged. But the other is just the kinds of resources we're allocating bothers me, and I suspect all the rest of you as well, is that we're using operations money for short-term capital expenses. And $1 million for some sidewalks pays almost for Fire Station 11. And you start looking at balancing this out. I mean, those operations funds, those general fund dollars are so valuable that to use them for spot repair strikes me as a short-term, is not the correct use as we're looking at PERS and maintaining our services and all the rest of it, that we have obligations tied up in the general fund. So I'm really hoping we can talk about bonding for some of the really projects like this. It's been our tradition. Public's been very good about investing in infrastructure when asked. We did 2 of them this year. We just got done with streets and bridges. We need to go back out. There's on that to just keep up with. We pay for our water system and our sewer system with fees that are consistently escalating to keep up with the challenge. So I think they're responsible, but I think we need to kind of it's time for a little bit of a course correction, make sure we're using money the right way.
Member Tigan?
Yeah, I think I would just add that I think there's also maybe a bit of the idea of priority-based budgeting hasn't fully taken either, because just because it's the last thing you decide to fund, if it's a fire station, that doesn't mean that's the thing that's eating into working capital $1.4 million. There may be something of a less of a priority than a fire station that costs that much. That doesn't meet the priority. And so I think there's a logic trap of, because we're adding this thing last, that's the thing that's actually putting us over the edge. Everything puts us over the edge. So, I mean, I think that in terms of figuring out what the priority is, and then making the decisions based on that, not necessarily in the order they came to us.
Okay. Anything else? Very good. We're going to move to the second to the last item here, and it's public testimony for future budget issues. Is there anyone present who would like to provide testimony regarding items not on this agenda? No? Seeing none? Okay. Is there any other business for the Budget Committee this evening? No? Seeing none? Meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, staff.
Beg your pardon?